Welcome to Newsmakers, celebrating America 250. I'm Andrew Donovan at Fort Stanwix in Rome. This national monument honors one of the oldest ways Central New York is part of the story of America. But our home is a hotbed of history. On this week's Newsmakers, we'll visit Auburn, the home of one of the best secretaries of state in U.S. history, William Seward, a Lincoln rival turned friend whose legacy lives in his purchase of Alaska. Auburn also the home of Harriet Tubman, because this region is rich in contributions to the anti-slavery movement. Seward, Tubman, and a guy named Jerry. The Jerry Rescue is a story we'll revisit right here, plus a president of the United States on trial right here in Syracuse. But we begin here at Fort Stanwix, which helped America from its earliest days. Ranger Kelly, you just told me you grew up in Rome.
I did.
So you've been around Fort Stanwix your entire life.
I have. Really cool birthday present for our nation and really cool thing to grow up with in your neighborhood.
And now you work here.
I do.
What's that like?
It's fun. I have a great job. I get to protect our nation's history. I get to tell the stories of the soldiers that lived in this area, and Rome is a long military town, so I feel like I'm doing my part to honor those folks.
So how is Fort Stanwix celebrating America 250?
We will have Declaration of Independence readings on July 4th.
But this fort is older than 250 years old. It was not built in 1776.
No. It was originally built in 1758 for the French and Indian or 7 Years' War, back when we were all British to protect the border of the original 13 colonies.
This was British built?
Yes, sir.
And then it became abandoned?
Yes, sir.
The Brits didn't need it anymore?
Nope.
But it was sitting here when America, or future Americans, realized, hey, we could use a fort.
Yeah. This is a strategic location within the New York waterway system where you have to pick up and portage or carry your boat. So this was a great spot to mark the border of the nation when the Revolution broke out. The Americans were actually given the order to rebuild a couple of 100 yards to the north of here on slightly less swampy ground if they couldn't find any remains of the original. But when they moved in 1776, they evidently did, because they built right on top of the original footprint. There was no reason for anybody to necessarily be out here. It was the wilderness for all intents and purposes, not necessarily a permanently settled location. So when the American Continental Army went to rebuild the fort, they had orders to find the driest location, which, because of the floodplain that we're sitting in, they thought would be a couple 100 yards to the north of us, where you start to slope into the Tug Hill. But they found the remains of the fort where it had been, and here we are today.
And so how does a historic fort then become this national monument?
Well, it takes about another 150 years. It's abandoned because it burns down. And then the Americans use it to sign treaties, marking this as the border, but also opening it up to the eventual settlement of the Erie Canal in western New York. And as people move through, people build over the fort, but they know where it always sat, and they treat it as a place of honor, even though it's built on top of. By the 1920s, by our sesquicentennial anniversary, people are debating whether or not this should become a national monument. And in 1935, being the middle of the Great Depression, it was declared a national monument, but in a very symbolic manner, with a act of legislation that said if the land or the money to purchase land was ever donated to the National Park Service, something more could be done. Flash forward to the 1960s, and people are getting ready to celebrate the bicentennial, and the city of Rome donates the land, and here we are today.
How is there any evidence that this is the same footprint?
So, in the 1960s and 70s, archaeological excavations were conducted, and 500,000 artifacts from pre-contact all the way through to the early canal period here in Rome were found, including footprints of the original fort. Charred lumber from the fire in 1781. We have a fireplace hearth on display that was originally built during that 7 Years' War period and used during the Revolution. So this right here is the hearth. There's some kind of quote in one of the administrative histories that the entire fort was built around this hearth. But what this is one of the best preserved examples of what was found when the fort was rebuilt and the archaeological work was done. So this is a fireplace that was used here in 1758 through the Revolution in 76 until the fort was abandoned. And when the fort was abandoned, many people started picking things out of the rubble to use salvage in many ways, as folks would. but just enough was left where we could show this is where the fort stood. And this room during the Revolution would have been an officer's room or a series of officers, so they would have had to share. The first place you want to visit is our Gregg building. All the names on the fort walls are the names of the officers that were in charge, and their names were put on the barracks that their soldiers were in. So this building is our orientation building. We have information about how the fort was constructed. We have soldiers' life displays. This is a model of the original American fort. As you can see, there's a few things that we weren't able to rebuild for various reasons in the 1970s. They include the sally port, which would be your back exit to the fort, which was protected by a swamp on the east side. The necessary building, if you have to use it, was necessary. The ravelin, which is a miniature fort that protects the exterior of the gate, and the headquarters building, which is where Peter Gansevoort would have been located.
The gate we would have come in was up here.
Yep, the gate we would have come in was right there, and the ravelin is this structure right here. So if I ever saw something rebuilt, I'd love it to be this, because what an impression it makes when you come through here that you're truly in a protected haven location. The ditch acted as military housing, so what a lot of people don't realize, because we're not used to fighting wars like that anymore, this war was fought right in our backyards. People were refugees in their own nation. And many of those folks, after their brothers or fathers or sons joined the Continental Army, the women and children, they just packed up and went along with because it wasn't safe to stay at home. So the soldiers get to march in the fort, and this is probably a great location for them because you're inside instead of in a tent. But families can't go in the fort because it's a military installation. So many of the families of the soldiers lived in the ditch surrounding.
Coming up on Newsmakers, more from Fort Stanwix, and later, how the Syracuse community made history by violating federal slave laws.
Follow me. So this is an example of a soldier's barracks that you'll be able to see when you come visit the park. It's kind of the luck of the draw which barracks building you get assigned to, and you'll see that there are some differences. So this one, it looks like it's got some nice bunks. Hooray, you get to sleep there. But it's 2 persons to a bunk, and the walls are kind of thin, so it gets really cold in the winter, and it gets really hot in the summer. Also, they're kind of flimsy, so you wouldn't want to be in here during an attack. As this is a rebuilt fortification, one of the benefits we have is this is a very hands-on spot. So as long as you're respectful, we invite you to come and look up close at things, interact with some of the stuff, learn a little bit more about what soldiers' life was like. We hope that when you walk in, it looks like it's been lived in because people were actively here. They were real humans, flesh and bone, just like you. So if you want to take a nap on one of the bunks, as long as you're out when we close, we'd be happy to have you. Otherwise, we'll put you to work the next day. There you go. That's what we're looking for.
Oh. So it's, what am I sleeping on, hay?
Yep.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to own the bag to put it in.
But
Otherwise,
I'd have to share this, right?
Yeah,
There's
you
another
have
person.
to share it.
I've slept on worse,
There you go. Yeah.
but usually better.
Well, would you rather sleep here or in a tent on the ground?
Oh, here.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's all in what you're used to, right?
I like this too.
Yeah, you can try that on if you want.
What size is it?
That I cannot tell
Let's
you.
see, let's
Let's
see.
see. Is this one larger? This one might be a little larger. Yeah, somebody rolled the sleeves up. There we go. And the clothing is so tight because it's to pull you into a military stance, right?
What do you think?
I think you could pull it off.
Yeah?
Yeah.
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 What do you guys think?
Ready for the Continental Army. We'll
I'm
put
ready.
you in line out there with their soldiers.
A private wouldn't wear this, would they?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes. Now, what condition it would be in, that's a different story, right? But theoretically, you're supposed to be given a full uniform kit, which includes, at least if you're one of the New York soldiers, a blue jacket with red facings.
Yeah, I like the colors. They knew what they were going. I mean,
Right?
they were catching on to something.
Fun fact, in the Smithsonian, there are exactly 2 Continental officers' uniforms on display. One belongs to George Washington. The other one belongs to Peter Gansevoort, commander of this fort during the siege of 1777.
Ranger Kelly, tell us about where we're standing now.
So we're standing on the flagpole bastion of the fort. In 1776, when the Americans rebuilt it, this was the spot they decided to put the flag. And in 1777, during that siege, within a day, when they were forced to ask surrender, Peter Gansevoort sent back a letter saying that I will defend this fort and garrison to the last extremity on behalf of these United States who have placed me here to defend it. And with that, his officers created a flag of red, white, and blue stripes. We're not quite sure the order or format, and there's lots of debates as to that. For a long time in American history books, people were certain that it was the original Stars and Stripes. However, that has been proven as a bit of a myth. With that being said, it was one of the first times a flag was flown on behalf of the United States in battle, and a cannon was shot at the enemy in response when that flag was raised and that letter was sent out. So you are on the spot where it happened. You are on the spot where we declared our intentions to not surrender this fort, and eventually we proved it true.
To think that this, in some form or another, has survived more than 250 years. What has happened in the years since and now to preserve this?
So there was nothing left, as I said, after the Revolution. It was built right over, except for the footprint. So in the 70s, the National Park Service hired historic architects to research how the fort was constructed. And with that, they actually found the original blueprints lying in the British Crown collection. Meticulous record keepers. So we were able to use those original blueprints and the notes that the Americans made when they were reconstructing the fort to rebuild it. So we are sitting in the exact location within inches of the original footprint, and everything that you'll see within the buildings is based off of objects that were found here or recorded as being here. We have a crackerjack maintenance staff that are full National Park Service employees that, along with maintaining the grounds, they've fixed this up as best they can. We've had a few projects where we're rebuilding things, as you can see, that have fallen apart over the year. This fort, though, this modern fort, is probably in much better condition than the original ever was, because we're using modern technology to help fasten up things, even though if we're using historic techniques. So it's a labor of love. It's a lot of work, but we want to keep it here for future generations.
Next on Newsmakers, a small statue in Syracuse depicts a big contribution to history as we celebrate America 250. Newsmakers is back from Fort Stanwix. Next, I visit Auburn, home to one of the best secretaries of state in U.S. history. Blood-stained bedsheets tell the lesser-known story of one of America's darkest nights. As President Lincoln was dying at Ford's Theater, Auburn's William Seward was also targeted just blocks away.
It was part of a larger conspiracy orchestrated by John Wilkes Booth. Lewis Powell was basically his top lieutenant.
An attack so brutal, Secretary of State Seward couldn't attend Lincoln's funeral, as his best friend, the First Lady, sent pressed flowers pulled from the president's casket. The frame now among Seward's possessions, well preserved because only his family has lived here. In 1951, his grandson's will left the house and its contents for this museum. The personal collection more intact than Washington's at Mount Vernon or Jefferson's at Monticello.
And just by crossing into the threshold of this parlor, we ourselves right now are following in the footsteps of 6 U.S. presidents, movers and shakers in abolition, women's rights, radical politics, Civil War generals, Harriet Tubman.
Tubman, a conductor of the Underground Railroad. The Sewards, her Auburn neighbors, opening their home, this basement, to shelter passengers escaping slavery.
From this room, there are multiple ways out.
The son of a slave owner grew up to defy federal law by protecting the fugitives, and then helped craft the Emancipation Proclamation. Viewpoints sharpened in this library, debated over dinner across the hall.
People who were enemies in the halls of Congress would break bread. We're talking men like Charles Sumner and Jefferson Davis. You could not get any further apart.
His signature dining room diplomacy at this very table, whether it was in Washington or Auburn.
Probably the greatest accomplishment of this style was convincing a very divided Congress and Senate to approve his idea, later dubbed Seward's Folly, to purchase Alaska.
A deal depicted in artwork. Mocked as Seward's Folly, the territory was added just 2 years after the Civil War. The Secretary of State helped expand civil rights and then expand the country itself.
The mission of the Seward House is to be a proponent of those values, the values of democracy, service, equality, progress, just like they did. And it really translates well into the celebration of the 250th. And Seward was also very famous for making 4th of July speeches where he is encouraging his audience, encouraging local citizens, and encouraging the country that this freedom and liberty is not guaranteed. It's something that we in every generation must continue to work on.
The legacy of a local man whose ideals helped America reach its first century. Auburn is also home to Harriet Tubman because this entire region is rich in contributions to abolition and the anti-slave movement. Tubman, of course, William Seward too, but also a guy named Jerry. Clinton Square is home to so much history, it might be easy to miss this. A statue put up in 1990 commemorating one of the most significant milestones toward America's abolition in 1851.
That Jerry rescue becomes a beacon for the movement. It is the first time that the Fugitive Slave Act has been successfully thwarted. It is an illegal act.
William Henry, known as Jerry, had escaped slavery in the South, but when Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, the runaway became a target.
Essentially allows federal agents to go into northern cities, deputize citizens, and kidnap black people off the street under the guise that they are freedom seekers. The evidence that would be used would be very, very skimpy, if at all.
Jerry was arrested and detained, eventually put in a jail on land that is now Clinton Square. A committee had been standing by to resist the law and gathered a group of thousands of protesters outside the jail.
Eventually that crowd is breaking, literally, bricks and trying to get Jerry out of jail. They do, they pull him out. He sort of crowd surfs over Clinton Street. They say his feet didn't touch the ground.
The rescue was celebrated annually until the Civil War and brought leaders like Frederick Douglass to town regularly.
So it puts Syracuse at the center of radical political activity, and even the idea of getting to the Jerry level is in the lexicon for the movement. So it is a truly significant event in the fight of marching freedom down the road in the United States.
It wouldn't be the only way Syracuse made civil rights history within that year. In 1852, Syracuse hosted the National Women's Rights Convention, the third after the first historic meeting in Seneca Falls.
It is critically significant for a couple reasons. One, that is Susan B. Anthony's first National Women's Rights Convention. This is also where Matilda Jocelyn Gage has her coming out party. She's a 26-year-old, a new mother, one child. She comes here from her home in Fayetteville and gives what is one of the more impressive speeches in the history of the movement. So you have Matilda Jocelyn Gage, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, and they will literally go on to write the book on women's suffrage.
We'll continue from Fort Stanwix when Newsmakers continues on News Channel 9. Newsmakers is back, celebrating America 250 from Fort Stanwix. About 5 years after leaving the presidency, Teddy Roosevelt was sued, and his trial happened in downtown Syracuse. Teddy Roosevelt remained his outspoken self after leaving the White House. After the once New York governor split from traditional Republicans, he called the state's GOP leader, William Barnes, quote, a political boss of the most obnoxious type. Accused of making a false, damaging statement, Roosevelt was sued for libel. The trial moved out of the state capital to Syracuse. Research by the Onondaga Historical Association shows the former president couldn't contain himself. Quote, not even lawyers' objections or the judge's gaveling could keep him from saying whatever he wanted. Well, it worked. A jury acquitted Roosevelt of the civil charges. The courtroom is still in use in the old Onondaga County Courthouse today. Roosevelt's chair on display.
This is where the lawyers would have been seated.
Lawyer and journalist Dan Abrams visited that courtroom in 2019 to celebrate the book he wrote about the trial.
This was an enormous story being covered all over the country. For weeks, Theodore Roosevelt on the witness stand. And somehow it became a footnote to history.
Especially on this milestone anniversary, make sure to take a moment to appreciate the history we have here at home. That does it for Newsmakers. My thanks to Melissa Thorne and Brownie for helping bring this edition of Newsmakers to my native county, Oneida County. And for all the hardworking people of News Channel 9, happy America 250.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.